Imagine standing on a dusty road just outside the ancient city of Rome, sometime in the 3rd century BC. The air smells faintly of smoke from cooking fires drifting over the hills. Ahead of you, a line of travelers moves slowly toward a massive stone gate set into thick defensive walls. Farmers lead donkeys loaded with sacks of grain. Soldiers in bronze helmets pass in small groups, their shields clattering softly with each step. Merchants push wooden carts filled with clay jars of olive oil and wine, hoping to sell their goods in the markets inside. As you step through the gate, the city opens before you in a chaotic, noisy sprawl. Narrow streets twist between tightly packed houses built from stone, wood, and brick. The ground under your feet is uneven and dusty, worn down by centuries of foot traffic. Above you, tall apartment buildings lean precariously toward one another, their wooden balconies almost touching across the street. Laundry hangs between windows, fluttering gently in the warm Mediterranean breeze. The sounds are constant. Blacksmiths hammer iron tools in open workshops. Vendors shout prices to passing customers. Children chase one another through crowded alleys, while stray dogs bark and dart between carts. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the echo of a temple bell calling citizens to prayer. Today, when people visit Rome, they often imagine the famous landmarks, the Colosseum, the Roman Forum, or the grand imperial palaces. But in this moment, centuries before the empire reaches its peak, Rome is still something different. It is a fast-growing, ambitious city struggling to define its place in the world. In modern Rome, more than 2 million people live among ruins that attract visitors from every corner of the globe. Cars move through busy boulevards built over ancient roads. Cafes stand where markets once bustled. Yet beneath the modern streets lies layer after layer of the older city, the one you are walking through now. By the 3rd century BC, Rome is already becoming one of the most important cities in the Mediterranean world. According to tradition, the city was founded in 753 BC along the banks of the Tiber River. The location is not accidental. The river provides fresh water and access to trade routes that stretch across central Italy. Nearby hills offer natural defensive positions against enemies. At first, Rome is ruled by kings. Early rulers build temples, organize armies, and begin shaping the city's political institutions. But around 509 BC, the monarchy collapses after growing resentment among the Roman elite. In its place, a new system emerges, the Roman Republic. The Republic is unlike most governments in the ancient world. Instead of a single ruler, power is shared between elected officials and a powerful Senate made up of wealthy aristocrats. 2 consuls are chosen every year to lead the government and command the army. In theory, this system prevents any one individual from gaining too much power. In practice, however, the system is far from equal. Rome's population is growing rapidly. By this time, historians estimate that tens of thousands of people already live within the city's expanding boundaries. Most are ordinary citizens, farmers, craftsmen, traders, and laborers who struggle to make a living in a crowded urban environment. The social divide between classes is obvious everywhere you look. Wealthy families occupy large stone houses with interior courtyards known as domus. These homes often include private gardens, decorative mosaics, and servants to handle daily work. But most Romans live very differently. The majority crowd into multi-story apartment buildings called insulae. These structures are built quickly and often poorly. Fires are common, and collapses are not unheard of. The higher floors are the cheapest, but also the most dangerous, forcing poorer residents to climb steep staircases every day just to reach their homes. Water is carried from public fountains, and sanitation is basic at best. Streets are filled with animals, carts, and waste. The smell can be overwhelming during hot summer days. Yet despite these hardships, the city pulses with energy. Markets are filled with goods arriving from surrounding farmland, grain, olives, vegetables, and livestock. Traders from other Italian cities bring pottery, metal tools, and textiles. News spreads quickly through crowded forums where citizens gather to debate politics or listen to public speeches. Rome is not yet the capital of an empire, but the ambitions of its leaders and the discipline of its armies are already beginning to reshape the entire region. Beyond the city walls, Roman legions march across Italy, fighting rival states and expanding Rome's influence. Each victory brings new territory, new wealth, and new challenges. Few people walking through the busy streets at this moment realize just how dramatically their city is about to change. Within the next few centuries, Rome will grow into the largest city the ancient world has ever seen. Its armies will dominate lands, stretching from Britain to Egypt. Its laws and culture will shape the foundations of Western civilization. But for now, Rome is still a rising power, crowded, chaotic, and full of restless ambition. And the story of how this small city on the Tiber became the center of a vast empire is only just beginning. Step back onto the crowded streets of Rome a generation later, and the atmosphere feels subtly different. The city is louder now, busier, and more confident. Merchants from distant regions push their way through the marketplaces, speaking languages unfamiliar to many Romans. Bronze coins change hands rapidly as traders bargain over shipments of grain, olive oil, and pottery. The smell of freshly baked bread drifts from street ovens, mixing with the sharper scent of livestock driven toward the slaughterhouses outside the city walls. The population has grown again. By the 2nd century BC, Rome is no longer just one of many Italian cities. It is becoming the political center of a rapidly expanding republic. Victories in a series of wars have transformed the city's fortunes. Soldiers returning from distant battlefields bring not only stories of conquest, but also enormous quantities of wealth captured from defeated enemies. Nowhere is this transformation clearer than in the markets and forums at the heart of the city. In the Roman Forum, crowds gather daily beneath the shadow of temples and government buildings. Senators wrapped in bright white togas move through the square, accompanied by attendants and clients seeking favors. Public speakers climb onto stone platforms to argue over new laws or military campaigns. Citizens stop to listen, occasionally cheering or shouting their disapproval. Compared to modern Rome, where tourists stroll quietly through the ruins of the Forum, taking photographs, the ancient space is chaotic and alive. Chickens wander between stalls, selling fruit and cheese. Lawyers argue loudly with opponents before nearby judges. News from distant provinces spreads quickly as travelers arrive with reports from the expanding frontiers of Roman power. The turning point in Rome's rise comes during a series of brutal conflicts known as the Punic Wars. These wars pit Rome against the powerful North African city of Carthage, one of the richest trading powers in the Mediterranean. For decades, the struggle dominates Roman politics and military strategy. The most famous moment arrives when the Carthaginian general Hannibal leads his army across the Alps with war elephants, launching a shocking invasion of Italy. Entire Roman armies are destroyed in devastating battles. For a time, it seems possible that Rome itself might fall. Yet the Republic refuses to surrender. Roman citizens continue raising new armies, even after repeated losses. Generals develop new strategies. Eventually, Roman forces carry the war into Carthaginian territory itself. In 146 BC, after years of fighting, the city of Carthage is finally destroyed. Its territory becomes a Roman province. This victory marks a turning point, not only in military history, but also in the life of the city itself. Suddenly, Rome controls vast new regions across the Mediterranean. Ships arrive in the port of Ostia, carrying grain from North Africa, wine from Greece, and luxury goods from the eastern Mediterranean. Slaves captured during wars flood the labor market, dramatically reshaping the Roman economy. In the streets of Rome, the effects are visible everywhere. Wealthy families begin constructing larger homes decorated with imported marble and elaborate mosaics. Public buildings grow grander as victorious generals sponsor temples and monuments celebrating their triumphs. New roads connect Rome to distant provinces, making travel and trade faster than ever before. But prosperity also brings new tensions. Many small farmers who once formed the backbone of the Roman army find themselves unable to compete with massive estates owned by wealthy aristocrats. These estates rely heavily on slave labor, producing grain and olive oil on a scale that smaller farms cannot match. As a result, thousands of displaced rural families migrate into Rome itself, searching for work. The city's population surges dramatically, filling the already crowded apartment buildings. Streets become even busier, and public spaces struggle to accommodate the growing crowds. In modern Rome, apartment blocks, train stations, and highways manage the movement of millions of people every day. But ancient Rome must adapt without such infrastructure. Traffic jams of ox carts often clog narrow streets. Officials eventually ban heavy carts during daylight hours, simply to keep movement possible. Meanwhile, political conflict intensifies. Reformers attempt to pass laws redistributing land to poorer citizens. Conservative senators resist fiercely, fearing that such changes will weaken their own power. Public debates become more heated, and political violence occasionally erupts in the very forums where citizens once gathered peacefully. Rome's success has created a paradox. The Republic is stronger than ever in terms of military power and wealth. Yet the internal tensions caused by that success are beginning to strain the political system designed centuries earlier for a much smaller city. Walking through Rome during this period, you would still see the same bustling markets, crowded homes, and noisy streets. But beneath the surface of daily life, powerful forces are building forces that will soon reshape the entire Roman world. The rise of Rome has only just begun, but the pressures created by that rise are already setting the stage for the dramatic struggles that lie ahead. Walk through Rome in the 1st century BC, and the city feels larger, louder, and more crowded than ever before. The streets pulse with constant movement from dawn until late into the night. Traders shout over one another in the markets. Construction crews hammer stone and wood as new buildings rise across the hills. Messengers push through crowds carrying urgent letters between political offices, while soldiers recently returned from campaigns move proudly through the streets wearing pieces of their armor. Rome is no longer simply a growing republic. It has become the center of a vast Mediterranean network of trade, politics, and culture. By this time, the population of the city may have reached 500,000 people, an astonishing number for the ancient world. In comparison, modern Rome spreads across wide avenues and planned neighborhoods. But ancient Rome grows organically, expanding wherever space can be found between hills, temples, and older streets. The result is a dense, crowded maze of neighborhoods, markets, and towering apartment buildings. Daily life begins early. Before sunrise, bakeries across the city light their ovens. The smell of fresh bread drifts into the streets as workers prepare loaves made from grain, imported from provinces such as Sicily and North Africa. Bread is the staple food for most Romans, often eaten with olives, cheese, or vegetables. Street vendors quickly set up small stalls selling hot food to passers-by. Bowls of thick grain porridge simmer over small fires. Roasted nuts, grilled fish, and honey-sweetened pastries attract customers rushing to work. For wealthier citizens, breakfast is simple but comfortable bread, fruit, cheese, and watered wine served inside elegant homes decorated with colorful wall paintings. For poorer residents living in crowded insulae, meals are smaller and less predictable. Many rely on cheap street food purchased from public vendors. Work varies widely depending on social class. Craftsmen fill the narrow streets of certain districts. Blacksmiths produce tools, nails, and weapons in smoky workshops. Potters shape clay vessels used throughout the city. Textile workers spin wool or dye fabrics, bright shades of red, blue, and purple. Dock workers at the port of Ostia unload ships carrying grain, oil, wine, marble, and countless other goods flowing toward the capital. These shipments are critical. Without them, the enormous population of Rome could not survive. In modern Rome, trucks deliver food daily through highways and rail lines. But in the ancient city, everything arrives by ship and river before being transported by cart through narrow streets. Water is another challenge for such a massive population. To solve this problem, Roman engineers construct an extraordinary system of aqueducts. These long stone channels carry fresh water from distant hills directly into the city. Public fountains appear in many neighborhoods, allowing residents to collect clean water for drinking and cooking. Public baths also become a central part of daily life. These enormous complexes offer hot and cold pools, exercise areas, and social spaces where citizens gather to relax and discuss politics or business. Even people of modest means can often afford the small entrance fee. Religion remains deeply integrated into everyday routines. Small shrines appear on street corners where citizens leave offerings to household gods. Large temples dedicated to Jupiter, Mars, and other deities dominate major squares. Priests organize festivals that fill the city with processions, music, and sacrifices meant to maintain harmony between the gods and the Roman state. But life in Rome is not always comfortable. Fires are a constant danger, especially in the crowded apartment buildings made partly from wood. Narrow streets make firefighting difficult. Crime also becomes a problem after dark. Without modern lighting, many areas of the city fall into near total darkness at night. Despite these risks, entertainment is everywhere. Theaters host dramatic performances based on Greek stories. Public games draw huge crowds eager to watch chariot races or athletic competitions. Later, massive arenas like the Colosseum will host gladiator battles and spectacles that attract tens of thousands of spectators. Walking through the city during this era, you would feel the energy of a civilization at its peak of creativity and ambition. Yet the same forces that made Rome powerful are also pushing its political system toward breaking point. As wealth flows into the capital and armies become loyal to powerful generals rather than the state, rival leaders begin competing for control of the republic itself. Soon, one man in particular will rise above the others. His name is Julius Caesar, and his actions will change the future of Rome forever. Walk through Rome in the middle of the 1st century BC, and you can feel the tension in the air. The city is still crowded and energetic, but beneath the normal rhythm of markets and daily life, political conflict has become impossible to ignore. Groups of citizens gather in the Forum, arguing loudly about the latest speeches in the Senate. Armed supporters of rival politicians sometimes march through the streets, creating sudden moments of chaos before disappearing into the crowd. The Roman Republic is reaching a breaking point. For generations, the system of shared power between elected officials and the Senate had worked reasonably well. But Rome is no longer the small city-state it once was. It now controls vast territories stretching across the Mediterranean. Governing such an enormous empire requires authority and coordination on a scale the old political structure struggles to provide. Ambitious leaders begin to see opportunity in this instability. Among them is a man named Julius Caesar. Caesar comes from an old Roman family, though not one of the wealthiest. What he lacks in inherited power, he compensates for with extraordinary ambition and political skill. Early in his career, he builds alliances with powerful figures, speaks persuasively to crowds, and slowly climbs the ranks of Roman politics. But Caesar's greatest advantage lies in his military success. In 58 BC, he begins a campaign in the region known today as France and Belgium. Over nearly a decade of fighting, his legions conquer vast territories in what the Romans call Gaul. These victories bring enormous wealth to Rome and immense popularity to Caesar himself. Every triumph strengthens his reputation. Soldiers returning from Gaul bring stories of daring battles and disciplined legions defeating powerful tribal confederations. Citizens in Rome celebrate these victories with public festivals and parades. But success also creates fear among Caesar's political rivals. Many senators worry that a general commanding such loyal armies could one day seize power for himself. They begin discussing ways to limit Caesar's authority once his military command ends. The crisis reaches its dramatic climax in 49 BC, standing on the banks of a small river called the Rubicon, which marks the boundary of his legal authority. Caesar faces a historic choice. Roman law forbids generals from entering Italy with their armies. Doing so would be an act of rebellion against the state. Yet turning back would mean losing the political power he has spent years building. According to later accounts, Caesar pauses briefly before giving the order to advance. His legions cross the river and march toward Rome. Civil war begins. News spreads quickly through the capital. Some senators flee the city in panic. Others scramble to organize resistance. Ordinary citizens watch anxiously as armies loyal to different leaders move across Italy. When Caesar finally enters Rome, the city does not erupt into destruction. Instead, the transfer of power is surprisingly swift. His rivals withdraw, and Caesar gradually consolidates control over the government. For the first time in centuries, one man effectively rules Rome. Although the Senate continues to meet and elections still take place, real authority now rests with Caesar. He introduces reforms aimed at stabilizing the state. Debts are restructured, new colonies are founded for variants, and the calendar itself is reorganized into a system much closer to the one still used today. But absolute power comes with enormous risks. Many members of the Roman elite fear that Caesar intends to make himself king, a title Romans have hated since the fall of their ancient monarchy centuries earlier. Rumors spread through the Senate halls. Conspiracies begin forming quietly among senators who believe they must act before the Republic disappears completely. On the morning of March 15th, 44 BK, known forever as the Ides of March, Caesar enters the Senate chamber for what appears to be an ordinary meeting. Within minutes, the course of Roman history changes. A group of senators surrounds him. Daggers flash in the dim light. In a matter of moments, Julius Caesar is stabbed to death on the Senate floor. Ironically, the conspirators believe they are saving the Roman Republic. Instead, their actions unleash another series of civil wars far more destructive than the last. Rival factions compete for control of the state, and armies once again march across Roman territory. Out of this chaos, a new political system will emerge, one that transforms Rome from a republic into something entirely different. The age of emperors is about to begin. If you were to enter Rome during the 1st century AD, the transformation would be impossible to miss. The city has become the undisputed center of a vast empire stretching across 3 continents. Ships arrive daily from every corner of the Mediterranean, carrying grain from Egypt, marble from Greece, spices from the East, and exotic animals destined for public spectacles. Rome is now the largest city the ancient world has ever seen. Historians estimate that by this time, more than 1 million people may live within the capital and its surrounding districts. To a modern visitor, Rome might feel like a sprawling European city filled with cars, cafes, and apartment blocks. But ancient Rome is denser, louder, and far more chaotic. Narrow streets wind unpredictably between hills covered in temples, public buildings, and massive entertainment arenas. At the heart of the city stands the Roman Forum, still the political and symbolic center of power. Yet the balance of authority has shifted dramatically since the days of the Republic. Following years of civil war after Caesar's death, his adopted heir Octavian eventually defeats all remaining rivals. In 27 BC, he receives the title Augustus and becomes the first Roman emperor. Although he carefully maintains the appearance of republican traditions, everyone understands that real power now rests with him. Under Augustus and the emperors who follow, Rome enters a long period of relative stability, known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. During this era, the city undergoes an extraordinary wave of construction. Augustus himself famously boasts that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Temples, basilicas, aqueducts, baths, and theaters rise across the capital, transforming the urban landscape. One of the most famous structures appears later under Emperor Vespasian and his son Titus, the Colosseum. This massive amphitheater can hold around 50,000 spectators. On days when games are held, crowds flood the surrounding streets hours before sunrise. Vendors sell food and wine to spectators waiting to enter. Inside, the roar of the audience echoes across the stone arena as gladiators battle, hunters fight exotic animals, and elaborate spectacles entertain the masses. Modern tourists now walk quietly through the ruins of the Colosseum, imagining the past. But in its prime, the building is deafening with excitement and tension. Elsewhere in the city, enormous public baths become central gathering places. Complexes such as the Baths of Caracalla include heated swimming pools, exercise areas, libraries, and gardens. For a small entrance fee, citizens from many social classes can spend hours bathing, exercising, and socializing. Daily life continues to revolve around food distribution as well. Feeding a population of more than 1 million requires enormous logistical effort. The Roman government organizes large shipments of grain from Egypt and North Africa, which are distributed to many citizens at reduced cost or even for free. Without this system, the capital could not function. The port of Ostia becomes one of the busiest harbors in the Mediterranean. From there, grain ships sail up the Tiber River toward the city, where warehouses store supplies before they are distributed across neighborhoods. Yet even during this golden age, Rome faces challenges. Fires remain a constant threat. The most famous disaster occurs during the reign of Emperor Nero in AD 64, when a massive fire destroys large portions of the city. Reconstruction follows quickly, with wider streets and new building regulations intended to reduce future risks. Political stability also depends heavily on the personalities of individual emperors. Some rulers govern wisely, investing in infrastructure and maintaining peace across the empire. Others rule through fear, purging rivals, and consolidating power through violence. Despite these fluctuations, the Roman Empire remains remarkably resilient for centuries. Roads stretch thousands of miles across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Trade flourishes across the Mediterranean. Roman law spreads across provinces, shaping local governments and legal systems. Walking through Rome during the height of the empire, you would see a city that feels almost unstoppable, a capital commanding armies, trade routes, and cultures across half the known world. Yet history has a way of humbling even the greatest powers. Over time, new pressures will begin eroding the foundations of Roman dominance. Economic strain, political instability, and growing threats along distant borders will gradually weaken the empire's grip on its territories. The city that once ruled the Mediterranean will eventually face challenges unlike any it had known before. And those challenges will transform Rome once again. Walk through Rome in the 4th century AD, and the city feels both familiar and strangely different. Many of the great monuments still dominate the skyline. The Colosseum continues to cast its massive shadow across nearby streets. Temples, baths, and forums remain standing across the hills of the ancient capital. Yet the rhythm of life has begun to shift. Rome is no longer the unquestioned center of the empire. For centuries, the city had functioned as the heart of Roman power. Emperors ruled from its palaces. Senators debated laws beneath the marble columns of the Forum. Armies marched through triumphal arches, celebrating victories from distant provinces. But by the late 3rd and early 4th centuries, the empire had grown so vast that governing it from a single city became increasingly difficult. Frontier wars along the Rhine and Danube demanded constant military attention. Trade networks stretched across enormous distances. Political crises erupted repeatedly as rival generals attempted to seize power. To address these challenges, emperors began spending more time in cities closer to the empire's borders, places like Milan, Trier, or Nicomedia. Rome remained symbolically important, but its role in day-to-day governance slowly diminished. One decision in particular would reshape the future of the empire. In AD 330, Emperor Constantine established a new imperial capital in the eastern Mediterranean. The city was called Constantinople, built on the site of the ancient Greek settlement of Byzantium. Located between Europe and Asia, Constantinople controlled vital trade routes and strategic sea passages. Over time, it would become the true political and economic center of the Roman world. Meanwhile, Rome itself continued evolving. Religious life underwent dramatic transformation during this period. For centuries, Roman religion had revolved around a complex system of traditional gods: Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and countless local deities honored through temples and sacrifices. But Christianity, once a small and often persecuted religious movement, began spreading rapidly across the empire. Constantine legalized the religion, and over the following generations, it gradually became the dominant spiritual force in Roman society. The city's landscape slowly changed to reflect this shift. Grand Christian churches began appearing alongside older pagan temples. One of the most significant structures was the early basilica, built over the traditional burial site of St. Peter. That site would eventually become the foundation for the enormous St. Peter's Basilica that stands in modern Rome today. Walking through the city during these centuries, you would see a fascinating mixture of world's ancient pagan monuments standing beside newly constructed Christian buildings. But the empire itself was entering a period of increasing instability. Economic pressures mounted as maintaining large armies and complex infrastructure grew more expensive. Political leadership became less stable, with emperors sometimes ruling for only a few years before being replaced. Along the empire's borders, new groups began moving into Roman territory. Germanic tribes, pushed by migration and changing climate conditions, crossed frontier rivers and settled inside imperial lands. In AD 410, something happened that shocked the entire Roman world. For the first time in nearly 8 centuries, the city of Rome itself was captured and looted by a foreign army. The Visigoths, led by King Alaric, entered the city after a prolonged siege. Although the damage was not as catastrophic as later legends would suggest, the psychological impact was enormous. Rome, the city that had once ruled the Mediterranean, had been violated by outside forces. Further invasions followed over the next decades. Finally, in AD 476, the last Western Roman emperor was deposed by a Germanic leader named Odoacer. Historians often mark this event as the formal end of the Western Roman Empire. Yet the story of Rome did not end. The city continued to exist, though on a far smaller scale. Many ancient monuments fell into ruin as population declined. Marble from abandoned buildings was reused to construct new homes and churches. Fields and gardens even appeared within the old city walls, where dense neighborhoods once stood. Over the centuries, Rome gradually transformed into a medieval city centered on the growing power of the Christian Church. Eventually, during the Renaissance and later periods, the city would expand again, building new palaces, plazas, and churches atop the foundations of the ancient world. Today, modern Rome is a place where nearly 3,000 years of history exist side by side. Cars drive past triumphal arches built by Roman emperors. Cafes operate near temples that once hosted sacrifices to forgotten gods. Millions of visitors walk through streets layered with centuries of human ambition, creativity, and survival. The story of Rome is not simply about the rise and fall of an empire. It is the story of how cities evolve, how they adapt to political change, survive disasters, and continuously rebuild themselves across generations. From a small settlement beside the Tiber River to the capital of a vast empire, and eventually to the modern city we know today, Rome has never truly disappeared. Instead, it has simply transformed again and again, leaving traces of every era beneath the streets where life continues to move forward